Very gay all According ein milas avoda to the shivchois of makvoson. If someone's a minor and he inherited slaves and he inherited maidservants and they were not circumcised or they were not immersed in the mikveh, we'll go down below. And it does not stop in makvosim ala pesach. He can be counted on the Korban Pesach. Shenema, because it says called Eved Ish. And the only time where the Eved impedes the owner from being on the Korban Pesach is if it's an Eved of an adult, an Ish. The cotton is not barred from being counted on the Pesach. So I guess the mission questions. The Mechilta learns from the Posik from called Eved Ish. The Isha and cotton, how do I know that they too have to have that they cannot have slaves? And that anything that was purchased by them, so that would be even in a cotton as well. So how come the Rambam disagrees with the Mechilta? And the answer is the Rambam learns had the text in the Mechilta called Ish v'loishel cotton v'isha cotton. And not like our text of the Mechilta. Here the Rambam says that a maidservant of a cotton that didn't go immerse is like avodim tanim that do not impede him from bringing a Korban Pesach. The Kiyevas Yankiv of Rabbi Yisrael Yankiv Al-Ghazi explains that the Mechilta is referring not to Eved Shu Ish, if he's a Godel. Eved Ivri, that means the Eved who is the Ivri. Rashi explains that. Isha means a maidservant. That the cotton means an Eved that's a cotton, not that a cotton owns a avodim. And only if the Eved is an adult, it does it, but not when he's a cotton. So the Mechilta questions, what's the din of a shivcha, of a maidservant? Hamalayim mignas kesef. Everything is included. And Mechilta is the source of the Rambam that the immersion of maidservants impedes one, as we learned in Hay, from making a Pesach. So the Mishnah questions the Kesef Mishnah. The Rambam had a different text in the Mechilta that we find in the Gemara that the Rambam is wrong, is not correct technically, because in Yevamos 48a, it says Eved Ish and not Eved Isha, meaning that Eved Isha is also would Eved. If a woman has an Eved that's not circumcised, it impedes her from eating from the Pesach or making a Korban Pesach. And the Mishnah Melech continues to ask, according to the Rambam, Eved Ish is to exclude the cotton. And why does the Gemara question Eved Ish v'lo Eved Isha? Eved Ish comes to say cotton. It's not talking about Isha at all. So to the Marie Korkis questions on the Gemara in Yevamos 48a, that says Eved Ish mignas kesef, Eved of an Ish and only Eved Isha, and therefore he explains the posuk that it comes to teach us that somebody who makes his Eved hefker, meaning he doesn't give him his freedom, he just says he's no longer his. The Eved goes out to freedom, because only an Eved of an Ish that the master has permission over him is called an Eved. And the question is, according to the Rambam, why doesn't the Gemara say that the posuk comes to teach us that Eved Ish is not a cotton? And Marie Korkis remains with a question. But he himself explains that it's understandable the halachic codification of the Rambam, because Milas Avdei Cotton to the Shivchosov does not stop him from being counted or being a member of the Pesach, because cotton is not obligated with mitzvahs. And if he's not obligated, why should it stop him from being numbered on the Pesach? Furthermore, it shouldn't stop him being the Pesach. We have a separate limud, as we learned earlier, that you can add a cotton to the Korban Pesach. But even though we don't have a proof of it, which is questionable, but still, the logic is there. The Shagas Aliyah cites the words of the Kesef Mishnah. He questions if the Rambam had a text and not of a woman. Why does the Rambam tell us that an Eved of an Isha does not stop her from eating a Korban Pesach, and certainly an Eved of a cotton? And he answers that the words of the Mechilta are refuted because the Gemara asks, Eved Isha, Eved Isha? So it seems that the Gemara definitely held that an Isha is obligated to circumcise her avodim, and if she doesn't, therefore, she would be prevented, if she had an Eved that wasn't circumcised, from eating on the Korban Pesach. Shagas Aliyah continues to question the question of the Mishnah Lamelech and the Rambam. Why does the Gemara say Eved Isha, Eved Isha? Maybe Eved Ish comes to minimize Eved of a cotton, but Eved of an Isha does impede him. And he answers with the same basis that to take off an Eved shel cotton, you don't need a posuk, because a cotton is potter from all the mitzvahs, and therefore he has no obligation. Therefore, it's not his Eved to stop him from having a Korban Pesach. And the Rambam, who says that an Eved Ish lo cotton, just mentions the words, but not that you need the posuk. It's a logic. It's only logic and not derived from a specific source. Rashi, Yevomis 71b, cites the name that if the father and the mother happen to be in a jail regarding circumcising their son, who has to do the bris on the 8th day? Everyone has to. It would seem that the mother is obligated as much as the father, because the Gemara puts them both together. But the Or Zarua says, the Gemara says the mother is not because the mother is obligated, just that if the mother wouldn't be in jail, certainly she would have to be the one to worry about circumcising him, or just as the Gemara mentions it for greater emphasis. The Mashal questions Rashi. The Gemara says only the father is obligated to circumcise his son, not the mother. Because it says by Milo Kashetziva Oisoi, by Avram V'loi Oiso. The Mashal explains that she is obligated to do the Pesach, therefore she has the mitzvah of circumcising her son in order to make it possible for her to bring a Korban Pesach. Because from the Gemara's question, Yevomis, Eved Ish le Eved Isha, we see that obviously if someone has an uncircumcised male in their house, such as an Eved, even if it's a woman, she cannot bring a Korban Pesach, and not because of the obligation of her son to circumcise his son when he's 8 years old. That's only on the father. The Mashal, his words are very bewildering, because by the son it says Oisoi v'loi Oiso, and therefore she's not obligated. Why should it stop her from eating a Pesach, whereas Avodim, which is her obligation, does stop her from eating a Pesach? Because according to the Mashal, the son is not her obligation. Why should it affect her bringing the korban? He explains how we learn from what it says in Mila Oisoi, and not her, that a woman is not obligated to circumcise her son. That's only the specific obligation of a father to circumcise his son. But by Pesach it says a mitzvah that the master and the father should not have in their home a uncircumcised person, is something that the woman is obligated to make sure that she doesn't have it in her house either. And there a woman was not excluded from that obligation. That's what the Mashal means to say. Therefore, by an Isha, the fact of the uncircumcised male slaves does impede her from making a Pesach because the woman is obligated in the forbiddenness to have at the time of the bringing of the Pesach any uncircumcised in her house, as we find in the Rambam, meaning that the father has to circumcise his son, and the master has to circumcise his slaves. Mignas bayis, mignas kesef. If the father or the master transgressed and didn't circumcise them, he nullified a mitzvah say. Bezdin have to then do it in the right time, or for that slave. They shouldn't leave uncircumcised among the Jewish people and not in their slaves. And that obligation is that there shouldn't be uncircumcised amongst us. And the Rashi says, the Rashi, that this chiyuv is obligatory also on the mother regarding the Korban Pesach, that she should not have an uncircumcised son amongst her household. But the Ruah says that Isha is not obligated to circumcise her child and or her slaves, and they do not stop a woman from bringing a Pesach, like we find in the Mechilta, that only Eved Ish, but not Eved Isha. Shagis Aya questions. After we explain that Eved the cotton does not impede the cotton from bringing a Pesach, because he doesn't have an obligation, why then should the immersion of shvochis of a man who's an adult, impede him from Pesach? Where do we find that the Odain is obligated to immerse his maidservants for servitude? He could do it, keep them as goyim, and if they cannot, if there's no mitzvah, she's and if he's not obligated to do that, it's like an eved of a cotton. He can be on the Pesach even though he did not circumcise his male slaves. And then by an odin, there's no mitzvah on, just like to immerse his maidservants, because the odin is obligated to circumcise Eved Zocho in one of two ways. When his mother immersed herself for a shifchus before the child was born, and the new master bought the child after it was born, or the Eved was born in his house. In both these instances, we learn from Miknas Kaspoy that the mitzvah of Milah is obligatory on the Eved, on the master. And the Eved, who is uncircumcised, impedes the owner from making a Pesach. But by Shivcha, the whole din that you need tefillah for Avdus is only when the mother was not, had not immersed for Shivchas before the child was born. And therefore, without tefillah, she's like a goita. But once she's born to a maidservant who's a Shivcha Ktanis, then, even though she too is a Shivcha Ktanis, the fact that her mother went to mikveh already makes her a shivcha. And so we see that in any case, there's no mitzvah tefillah on the master. Why should the tefillah impede the odain from making the Pesach? So, and this is true about anybody who buys an eved from the marketplace before Pesach, and he doesn't want to circumcise him. He's still a goy, because on a goy there's no obligation to circumcise them. He's a goy. It's only obligated somebody who he has purchased or was born into his household. That means that he purchased a slave that was born from a shivra knanis, and not by a goy. Even though there's a machloikis, if you can keep an eved that wasn't circumcised, whether you're allowed to hold on to him. So he mentions here that this is a disagreement as to whether you're allowed to keep a goy in servitude if he doesn't want to accept to become a Jew, or you have to send him back to where he got it from. The one who says that it's also to keep such a goy will admit that even though he's over on Issa Shabbat Torah, but he's a goy, he's not a Jew, and therefore he can eat the Korban Pesach. The Shagas Aryeh concludes, we see from the Rambam that the immersion of his maidservants in a mikveh does impede him from bringing a Pesach, even though they have a din of a goy before they are immersed. And so too a woman that's not obligated to circumcise her slaves, since Mila is a mitzvah, say that is time delineated, because Mila is only done by day, even by avodim, even if it's not the 8th day. The slaves that are uncircumcised keep her from doing the Pesach, and so too the immersion of the shvochos. Just like by the master, that he doesn't, that there's no obligation to immerse his maidservants, but they keep him from making a Korban Pesach because he has in his house someone who technically is not Jewish to any extent, and it's his money, and therefore he's not allowed to bring a Korban Pesach. The Minchas Chinuch discusses an Eved that they circumcised him and he did not go to the mikveh. If that stops the Odoin from making the Pesach, or he's only obligated to make the circumcision. But if if he's not obligated to circumcise him, then he's a stranger, and he wouldn't stop the owner from bringing a Pesach. Or should we say that an Eved that was circumcised and it wasn't immersed yet is like the obligation of a master to immerse his maidservant? So this fellow also has to be immersed, that it impedes him, because that's what the Posuk says. That somebody has an Eved that wasn't circumcised, or a maidservant that wasn't immersed, is impeded from making a Korban Pesach.